Okay, our topic today is about the unseen literature. Unseen literature. What you are expected to know is number one, to define the unseen literature. You should know what unseen literature means. You should enumerate the characteristics of unseen literature. You should outline the procedures to follow in tackling any unseen literary passage. Finally, you should apply the procedures for tackling the unseen to analyzing a sampled unseen prose passage. I will give you at the end of this recording a poem to apply the procedures in order to tackle or to analyze this poem, depending on what we are going to learn in this lecture. Now, what do we mean by the unseen literature? Unseen literature means that any literary work that hasn't studied or read before. I will repeat, unseen literature means that any literary work that hasn't studied or read before. So it is expected that you will use the suggestions in this unit to analyze any unseen literature that you may come in contact with. What are the characteristics of the unseen literature? طبعا these points, you are not required to memorize these points. You can find them in your book. Number one, not ever seen or read before literary appreciation is demanded of you. Number two, the fact that the author may not be known. يعني you might find a poem and the author of this poem is unknown, or you may read a poem for the first time you haven't read before. Number three, the fact that the passage may be prose fiction, prose non-fiction, poetry, or drama. And finally, the fact that if not peculiar to any other work of art seen in terms of basic devices used by the literary artist, etc., etc., etc. Don't memorize these points. Now, if you haven't seen a poem before, but can identify and discuss the basic devices, طبعا we took them, used to bring out the beauty and the meaning of the poem in an effective manner. Bulk, a lot of your task in tackling the unseen poetry is solved. يعني in two words, you should be familiar with the literary devices in order to tackle the unseen poetry or the unseen literature in general. Okay? So what are the skills needed to tackle the unseens? يعني if you encounter a poem for the first time or a drama for the first time or a play or a novel, what should you do or what must you do? First, you should possess the usual reading skills. You should read it. Don't Google anything or any information about a poem or a novel without reading it. You should read it. Second, you should possess comprehension skills. يعني you are an English major or you are English major students. You should possess welcome badges. You should possess comprehension skills. You should be familiar with the meaning or the meanings of the words, especially if the poem or the drama or the novel came from an old English writer. Number three, you should possess the ability to identify the literary devices or techniques. يعني you should be familiar or you should familiarize yourself with the devices. We discussed them like, for example, metaphor, symbols, simile, style, characterization, etc. Finally, you should possess the skill of identifying the theme. you should be able to identify the theme in any literary work. Okay, so I can summarize these points. First, you should read. Second, you should comprehend. Third, you should look at literary devices. Finally, you should identify the theme. تمام. Now we start a new subject, which is the procedures for tackling the unseen literature. How to tackle. Again and again, you should read any literary work you are going to tackle. You should read it. You should read it once, twice, three times. You should read. Number two, you should take notes. Without taking notes, you sometimes forget. So when you read a poem, for example, for the first time, you should take some notes. Number three, you should obtain a surface and a deeper meaning of what the poem is all about. You should identify, or you should, let's say, obtain a general meaning and a deeper meaning of the poem. Number four, you should determine. طبعا these points are not for memorization. Don't memorize. These are skills for you to follow. Number four, you should determine the type of unseen passage or poem. So the unseen poem may be any of the following. You can find these things on page 93. It may be an ode, it may be an elegy, which is a poem for the dead. You may read a sonnet. A sonnet is a poem of 14 lines. You should read a poem with a blank verse. Blank verse here means we don't have a regular rhyme scheme, and etc. Now, when you read the unseen, you should analyze the language and consider the following. The language is very important, especially language manipulation. The writers usually play in words, play in words. So you should look at the diction, the choice of words. You should look at the denotative meaning and the connotative meaning. Okay? Then you should look at figure of speech like metaphors and similes and etc. Number C, you should look at the proverbial language and idioms in literature in general. This means the peculiar use of language to convey meaning that are deep and not literal, or ordinary. For example, we are familiar with it rains cats and dogs. Here, it rains heavily. It means it rains heavily. It doesn't mean that the sky or cats and dogs are falling from the sky. So we should be familiarize ourselves with the connotative and the denotative meanings of the words. What about the drama? In drama, the presentation of characters, whether flat, round, foils, we should familiarize, or we should identify the presentation of the characters. We know what a flat character is. Flat character doesn't change. Round character or round characters in general change or go under change. Foils, these are characters created to create a laughing or to create an entertaining atmosphere, especially in tragedies. Also, we sometimes have the so-called rhetorical questions. Rhetorical questions. Rhetorical questions in general mean that questions whose answer is clear. We know the answer. The writers use such questions to make an impression. Now you should read page 94 and 95 to get a good idea about what we have discussed so far. Now, on page 96 here, there is a poem by Fadwa Tuqan. Fadwa Tuqan, we know Fadwa Tuqan. You should read the poem and analyze it. It's on page 96. It starts with, they shut me in a dark cell. When you finish reading and analyzing, send me your